Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer and welcome to Best Kept Plans. Today's video is going to be a reading recap for June 2023. If you're interested in seeing what books I read last month, please stick around. As I said in my introduction, we're doing a reading recap for June 2023. I had a little bit of a roller coaster ride with regards to books this month, but I'm very pumped to share with you all what I ended up reading. I am, as usual, going to be referencing my Archer and Olive Amy Tangerine reading journal. I did just recently post a flip through of this for the second quarter of the year, and if you watch that video, you'll know that I'm actually phasing out of this reading journal. It is super stuffed up, and I am not going to be able to fit another 6 months of reading in here. So this is the last reading recap that I'm doing that's going to have books in this journal. So I'm going to flip to the correct page on here, and we're going to talk about the first book that I read this month. I actually listened to this on Audible. This is a book that I have been wanting to read for a really long time and just hadn't gotten around to it, and that is Nora Goes Off Script by Annabel Monaghan. I will say I was a little bit disappointed in this story. I knew it was a romance, it seemed interesting, and I think that for me, the pacing just didn't work. I feel like the romance part of the story, the initial romance part of the story, was too quick and too early on, and the part of the story that involved conflict and miscommunication went on for too long, and it ended up taking away from the story for me, so I did give this 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was actually an ARC that I got through NetGalley, and that is The Modern Girl's Guide to Magic by Linsey Hall. I knew I needed to request this book when I saw the cover. I thought it was so pretty. I also really loved the title, and let me tell you, the book itself lives up to the title and the cover. It is so much fun. It is a romance, but there's definitely a lot of character development with regards to our female lead and like learning your power and your self-worth and all of that. I loved the relationship between the female and male leads. I liked the relationship building that they did. I also loved the magical elements to this story. It's a bit of a light fantasy, and I really loved it and would highly recommend it. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was another ARC that I got through NetGalley, and that was Cassandra in Reverse by Holly Smale. I think that's how you say it. This one, there were definitely parts of this story that I really enjoyed and appreciated, but I do feel like there were elements to it that were kind of dragging for me and just were hard to keep my attention. And so while I overall liked the story, I did feel like it was more of a middle of the road read for me and ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that we're going to talk about is a book of poetry. For 2023, I want to try to read 1 book of poetry every year. And for June, I ended up picking up The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. Look at this cover. It's just so beautiful. I did really enjoy this book of poetry. It, in like the last third, started dragging a little bit for me, but then it really picked up towards the end, and overall I ended up really liking it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I would definitely read more from this poet again. After that book of poetry, I really wanted to pick up another romance. I was feeling very much in a romance vibe, and I ended up deciding to pick up a newer romance, and that is The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. I have heard this book compared to The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane, which I read last year and gave 5 out of 5 stars. And I definitely understand why people make that comparison. These shows are loosely based on similar things or have similar plot devices in them. That being said, it is not a scenario where if you read The Charm Offensive and then you read this, you're going to feel like you're reading the same story. Not at all. I did not get that vibe at all. This is definitely a different story. It's definitely an original story and an original storyline. And I actually really, really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Definitely one of the better Christina Lauren books I have read. After reading that romance, I did end up going right into another romance that was an arc that I got off of NetGalley, and that is The Happy Life of Isadora Bentley by Courtney Walsh. I absolutely loved this book. I loved the main character. I loved the male lead. I loved the character development throughout. It was such a lovely story. It was more than just the romance of the story. It spoke to me. I just enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I can't say enough good things about it. I highly recommend. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. After that, I did decide to go into a mystery thriller. I want to read one mystery thriller book every year in 2023, and I knew that I had gotten approved on NetGalley for the newest Riley Sager book, which is called The Only One Left. And when I did get approved for it and saw that it was releasing in June, I wanted to read it by the release date, and I wanted to pick that as my mystery thriller. So I did. This is the second Riley Sager book I've read, and I liked his last story, but I didn't love it. This one I absolutely loved. It is a little bit of like a historical fiction as well. The plot continues to like morph and develop. The characters are really intriguing, and I did not see the twist coming at all. I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend. Next, we have another romance that is one that I requested off NetGalley, and I do feel like as I'm making my way through the books I've requested on NetGalley and also looking at newer things to request, I'm starting to be much more selective. And so I think that if current me would not have tried to request this book, but it was sitting in my shelf on NetGalley and I had to get to it, and it is called Change of Plans by Dylan Newton. I just didn't connect with this story for some reason. I feel bad saying that because there are things that this story attempts to talk about that I think are really interesting and important. It dives right into talking about anxiety and PTSD. It deals with veterans. It talks about familial loss, instant parenthood, all of these really interesting topics that I think could have made for an incredible story. I just feel like the execution didn't get it where it needed to be, and so it ended up falling very flat. I do feel like the romance element to the story happened way too quickly and felt almost kind of like insta-love-esque. And so for that, I ended up giving this 2.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was actually an arc I got approved for on NetGalley, but it was an audiobook arc, and that is The Block Party by Jamie Day. This one's challenging for me because I actually ended up appreciating or enjoying the mystery side of it, like the thriller aspect of it, that it grabs your attention and it makes you want to find out like who done it, what happened, but the lead up to that is a little bit boring and also kind of like eye-rolling because the characters to me were kind of insufferable, and I'm sure that the author had the intention of making them insufferable, but I think that there needs to be some element of the character that makes you care still, and I don't think that the characters really had that, and so the mystery part was intriguing enough that I wanted to know what happened, but the characters are really frustrating. So I did give it 3 out of 5 stars, but I didn't love it. And I'm curious if I would have liked it more if I would have read it instead of listening to it. But I'll never know, I guess. The next book that I read in the month of June was another arc that I got through NetGalley. This one, if you watch my TBR, was the one that I was most nervous about this month, and that's a most Agreeable Murder by Julia Seals. I knew from the cover that this was kind of going to be a Regency style, Regency era book. I was intrigued by that, but also nervous about that. And I must say, this book was such an incredibly pleasant surprise to me. I absolutely loved this. Yes, it's Regency era, but it's very easy to read. It is also incredibly funny and witty, and it knows what it is, and it makes fun of that in a really enjoyable way. I just love this. I loved everything about this. It also, from a mystery thriller perspective, like everything takes place in the course of one night at a single house. It has almost like a Clue vibe to it. The murder mystery keeps like unraveling. You think you know who did it, but then it turns out it wasn't that person. So that was also really fun. I'm really wanting to read more from this author. I need to look her up. I don't know if this was her first book or not, but I'd also love for this to become a series. I think that would be really cool as well. I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. Next, I read my Instagram challenge book for June. Every month of the year I try to read one book that was recommended to me by someone on Instagram, and for this month the book was The Rosie Project. I immediately was intrigued by this book. It immediately got me hooked. I wanted to keep reading. I had to keep reading. I fell in love with the main character, Don. This is kind of a romance story, but told from a male perspective, which is not something I've necessarily read a lot. And this book just like, it was so endearing. It was so enjoyable to read. It was also very emotional as well. I don't know why it made me so emotional, but I like bawled hysterically towards the end of this story. And this is a series, and I cannot wait to continue with the series. I'm definitely going to read the entire series. So I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. And the last thing I wanted to mention was that 7 Days in June by Tia Williams was on my TBR for June, and I did say that I feel like I have to read this book in June. I don't know what I was thinking, but I left it for the last book on my TBR, and I did start it in June, but I unfortunately did not finish it until July 1st. I'm actually filming this on July 1st. I finished it this morning, and so I'm not going to talk about it in this recap video. I will talk about it in my July recap video since I did finish it in July, but just so you're aware, I did get to this in June. I just didn't finish it in June. And that is going to be it for my June 2023 reading recap. If you have read any of the books that I read and want to chat about them down below, spoiler free, please leave me a comment. If you have any book recommendations for me, please leave me a comment. And as always, everyone, please be safe. Bye-bye.